Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. I am Shamalin Ansandad, and for today's video I will going to talk about the Orientalism, globalism, and the possibility of alternative systems of representation. So, Orientalism and globalism refer to materially founded relations of power and domination and culturally constructed discourses that simultaneously conceal these relations and justify behavioral patterns or specific actions that sustain them. So, this Said's representation focuses on those aspects of Said's work that either relate more immediately to the current concerns of an increasingly globalized world or are particularly useful methodologically or theoretically to provide a better understanding of the current discourse of globalism. So this topic concentrates on four closely related aspects that were of major concern of Said throughout his life. So number one is globalization or imperialism, globalism or Orientalism. So it seems to be clear that globalization can neither be perceived simply as the latest stage of imperialism nor globalism as the most recent version of Orientalism, but there are a number of connections and similarities. So this becomes particularly apparent if the analysis is focused on what Said describes in his introduction to Orientalism as the third meaning of Orientalism, which is Orientalism as a Western style for dominating, restructuring, and having authority over the Orient. So this was Said 1995. So both Orientalism and globalism refer on the one hand to materially founded relations of power and domination, and on the other to culturally constructed discourses that at least partly conceal those relations of power and domination and justify behavioral patterns or specific actions that sustain those relations. The problematic relationships between, on the one hand, globalization and imperialism, and on the other, globalism and Orientalism, can be addressed on two levels. So, first is it is necessary to more clearly establish the continuities between the imperial era and current forms of globalization. So, ang second is the differences between the two phenomena and the new quality of specific aspects of globalization need to be identified. This would enable us to more fully appreciate the contemporary opportunities but also the spatial, methodological, and conceptual limits of Said's critique of Orientalism. So nasabi nga ni Said sa isang interview ang kanyang view that globalization exacerbates social inequities, and sinabi niya dito na there's been a widening gap between the rich and the poor in Middle East society, and globalization with its transformation of economies into vast consumer markets for venture capitalism has made things worse. Sinabi niya ito noong 2000 sa isang interview. Sa 2001 naman is sinabi ni Said ang increasing commodification of information and the negative role of the mass media on the individual consciousness and the oppositional role of intellectuals. And sinabi niya dito na individual consciousness in our age is bombarded, if it isn't also stifled by vast amounts of organized and packaged information. Its main goal is to generate a kind of accepting and questioning collective passivity. Most of the time, we are bombarded with images that ask us to submit to them and in the end buy them, whether through news or commodities or travel or whatever. So sa isang same interview din, Said seems to equate globalization with the perpetuation of the hegemony of the United States through the fight against terrorism on a global scale. So this Said's usage of the term globalization was neither particularly lucid nor consistent, might be explained by the fact that it was not central to most of his literature-based analysis in Orientalism, culture and imperialism, or elsewhere. So in the chapter 1 of Culture and Imperialism, which is overlapping territories, intertwined histories, this chapter emphasizes the continuities between imperialism and the actualities of the contemporary world. The historical continuities are made sufficiently clear, but what remains rather fuzzy is whether there is not only continuity but also discontinuity and difference between Said's fully global world and his notion of imperialism. So at the end of the same chapter, Said seems to be more strongly aware of the differences but gives a reason for his emphasis on continuities. So, against the background of certain development in the early 1990s, USA as the only superpower, Yugoslavia, the Gulf War, Said seemed to argue that imperialism was actually returning. In an interview in 1993, Said expressed the view that at the time when he was writing Culture and Imperialism, it was not after imperialism. There's a late 20th century renewal of it. Said 2001 B 191. So that's all. Shukran.